Samuel was the last of the judges, and he was a prophet of God. He was a man of faith, a true hero of the faith. But his mother, Hannah, you see, was barren, and she longed for a child. She and her family used to go each year to Shiloh, where the tabernacle was at that stage. And this one year, she was praying in the sight of Eli, the high priest. Notice what she says here in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 11. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. Well, God listened to this humble prayer, and he gave this woman what she asked for. She gave her a son, and she called him Samuel. Well, this woman was a woman of God, and she didn't forget what she had promised to God. So the following year, she came to Shiloh with her family and went to Eleazar, the high priest. And notice what she says in 1 Samuel 1, 26 to 28. She said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. For this is my boy, I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition which I asked of him. So I have dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord, and he worshipped the Lord there. Well, as soon as young Samuel was weaned, Hannah took the child to Eli and left him there in his care. Indeed, he truly was dedicated to the Lord. And as he grew in size and in faith, God visited the young child, Samuel, and proved him to be the prophet that we know him as. You see, Eli was a man with 2 wicked sons, and God had spoken to him about these sons and called on them to repent, but they would not listen. So now God comes to Samuel and calls out to him in the middle of the night, Samuel, Samuel. And he thought it was Eli who was calling him. So he got up and ran to his guardian and said, I'm here. This happened 3 times. And finally, old Eli realized that God was calling to Samuel. And so he told him to stay there and wait for what God had to say to him. And we pick this up in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 10 through 12. Then the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. The Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel, at which both ears of everyone who hears will tingle. In that day I will carry out against Eli all that I have spoken to him concerning his house from beginning to end. What a tough message for the young child to pass on to Eli. But that's what he did because he was a man of God. Well, Samuel proved to be the greatest of the judges, and he lived a long life. But unfortunately, the nation of Israel continued to be wicked and rejected Samuel as being their judge and called for a king in his place. And so we pick up the story in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 through 7. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, Behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations. But the thing was displeasing in the sight of Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, Listen to the voice of the people in regard to all they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. So we pick it up now in verse 10. So Samuel spoke all the words of the Lord to the people who had asked him for a king, and said, This will be the procedure of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and place them for himself in his chariots and among his horsemen, and they will run before his chariots. And he went on to explain how their life would no longer be free. They would be required to give all things to the king, but still they called for a king. And they selected the man Saul, who started out being a good king, but all that power got to his head and changed him. And he started to become disobedient to the Lord and displeasing to God. So Samuel was told to select another king for them, and God chose the man David. We find now in 1 Samuel 16 and verse 1. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go, and I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons." Verse 13. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward, and Samuel rose and went to Ramah. Samuel was a great man. He lived this long life, and it was a difficult life. But throughout it all, he remained faithful and true to God. He truly was a hero of the faith.